Step through the gates at Summit Circle in Beverly Hills, and you are standing inside a 10,000 square foot mansion that Manny and Jinkee Pacquiao bought for $12.5 million. 7 bedrooms, a home theater, a pool deck with fire pits. This house once belonged to Sean Combs, and Jinkee beat out 2 rival bidders to get it, the same way her husband once beat opponents in the ring. But this mansion is only the entry point because behind it sits an empire across Los Angeles, Manila, and General Santos City, built by a woman who once sold cosmetics behind a mall counter. Inside the Beverly Hills mansion, the house sits behind guard gates on Summit Circle, and that street alone is one of the most exclusive addresses in Beverly Hills. Manny Pacquiao beat 2 other bidders for it in March 2015, and he did it fast, since he only viewed the property one weekend and made up his mind almost immediately after. It is a 7-bedroom, 7.5-bathroom estate covering 10,000 square feet, and it had been listed at $12.5 million. Nobody ever confirmed the exact final price, but real estate reports at the time said it landed close to asking. 3 buyers wanted that house, yet the sellers went with Pacquiao anyway, and a big part of that came down to who he was. The mansion had belonged to Sean Combs, still going by Puff Daddy back then, and for a stretch Jennifer Lopez lived there with him too. Pacquiao bought the place fully furnished and asked the family to leave everything exactly as it stood. In return, the previous owner simply wanted 4 tickets to his upcoming fight against Floyd Mayweather, and both sides shook on it without much back and forth. Inside, the house opens into a 2-story entrance with a sweeping staircase, a crystal chandelier catching the light from the front door, and a media room built to seat 20 people. There is a chef's kitchen with imported countertops too, plus a backyard laid out with a pool, fountains, and fire pits circling a stone patio. None of that comes cheap to maintain either, since annual upkeep alone runs close to $50,000, and property tax adds another $180,000 on top of it every single year. Manny kept his own explanation simple when reporters asked why he bought it. "Behind all my success in life is my wife, Jinky," he said, "and this mansion is my gift to her and our children." Years later, Jinkee took over a full interior redesign herself, swapping the original decor for a cleaner, more modern look, and she shared the whole transformation piece by piece with her own followers, room by room, over several months. A house like this would define most families for generations. For the Pacquiaos, though, it is just one property out of dozens. The neighbors alone show how far Manny had come by that point. Gwen Stefani and her family lived just down the street, and Britney Spears had once owned the house right next door, so a boxer who grew up without running water in General Santos was suddenly sharing a private, guarded street with some of the biggest names in American entertainment. The whole area sits inside what locals call the Summit, a section of Beverly Hills known for round-the-clock security patrols and the kind of privacy that money alone cannot always buy. Manny had actually scouted several other properties before this one, sending people ahead to walk through listings on his behalf. But something about the Combs estate settled the decision fast. Jinkee reportedly loved the master suite and its matching his and hers closets the moment she saw them, and by most accounts that detail sealed it more than any other feature in the house. Even the garage played a role in the pitch, since the property came with room for roughly 25 vehicles, more than enough space for the growing collection of cars Manny had already started buying by that point in his career. Real estate agents who worked in the area at the time said listings on that particular street rarely stayed open long, and competition among wealthy buyers for a house with that kind of celebrity history only made the bidding tighter. What most people never realize is that this $12.5 million house was never the real center of the story, from cosmetics counter to Beverly Hills. Before any of this, Jinkee Jamora sold beauty products for a living, and that job is where her whole story really starts. She was born on January 12, 1979, in General Santos City, right alongside her twin sister Janet. Her parents, Nestor Jamora and Rosalina Capena, came from modest backgrounds in Sarangani and southern Leyte, and by most accounts the family got by buying and selling coconuts, a trade that left very little room for luxury growing up. So Jinkee studied business management at Notre Dame, then went on to take a 2-year computer programming course at AMA Computer University, stacking 2 very different skill sets long before she ever met the man who would change her life. To pay her own way through school, she worked as a beauty consultant inside a General Santos mall, standing behind a counter for hours at a stretch. She was working that cosmetics counter at Philmark Mall when she first crossed paths with Manny Pacquiao, then just a rising local boxer with no international fame yet, and honestly, no fortune to speak of either. They married on May 10, 2000. Neither one of them owned a single property at the time, and neither could have guessed what the next 15 years were about to bring them. But Jinky did not stop working once the boxing money started rolling in. She went on to produce films tied to her husband's career, including Anak ng Commander in 2008, taking a real producer credit instead of just standing on the sidelines of her own family's story. Bit by bit, she built her own stake in real estate and beauty ventures too, kept separate from Manny's holdings and registered entirely under her own name. That cosmetics counter job never really left her. It shaped the business instincts she still leans on today, running ventures that answer to nobody but her. Jinky has told interviewers over the years that Manny used to stop by her counter just to chat, long before either of them had any money to speak of, and that the two of them married only about 7 months after they first met. A fast timeline for two people who barely knew each other's world. She was 20 years old at the time, still years away from the vice governor's seat, the movie credits, or a single mansion. Growing up as one of twin girls in a family that survived on buying and reselling coconuts meant Jinky learned early how thin the line could be between having enough and having nothing at all. And friends who knew her back then have said that lesson never fully left her, even decades into a completely different kind of life. Her twin sister Janet largely stayed out of the spotlight over the years, choosing a quieter path, while Jinky's own life became increasingly public with every passing boxing match her husband won. That contrast between the two sisters, one visible on magazine covers and social media, the other almost entirely private, says something about how much of Jinky's fame was a choice rather than something that simply happened to her by accident. She has said in past interviews that she never expected any of it either, and that the version of her life people see today would have sounded impossible to the 20-year-old girl folding clothes and restocking shelves behind that same mall counter. The Los Angeles base. Beverly Hills was not actually the family's first American address, though. Back in 2009, Pacquiao bought a 5-bedroom mansion in the Hancock Park neighborhood of Los Angeles for roughly $2.17 million, a Mediterranean-style home with arched doorways and a tiled courtyard that later even showed up on an episode of MTV Cribs. The family used it whenever Manny trained or fought in the United States, so it worked more like a second home than a full-time residence. He put it up for sale in 2015, asking $2.7 million once the Beverly Hills mansion took over as the family's new American base, which turned a 6-year-old purchase into a modest profit once the numbers were added up. All through this stretch, Manny trained nearby at Freddie Roach's Wildcard Boxing Club in Hollywood, the same gym tied to nearly every major fight camp of his career. A small, unglamorous space that stood in sharp contrast to the mansions surrounding it. What almost nobody outside the family realized at the time is that Los Angeles real estate was never actually the biggest property line on the Pacquiao ledger. That title belongs to a mansion 12 time zones away, one that would go on to appreciate faster than anything the family ever owned in California. And to understand that one, the story has to fly back across the Pacific entirely, all the way to Manila, where the real money had already been quietly stacking up for years before Beverly Hills ever entered the picture. The Hancock Park house itself was never flashy by Pacquiao standards either. It had 3 bedrooms rather than 7, a modest pool, and a quasi-Spanish look that felt almost restrained compared to what would come later. Manny kept training partners and staff close by during fight camps, and the neighborhood put him within easy driving distance of Roach's gym, television studios for interviews, and the airport for the constant back and forth between Los Angeles and General Santos City. For a boxer whose entire career depended on being ready to fight halfway across the world on short notice, a base like that mattered just as much as any square footage or price tag attached to it. Manny eventually sold the Hancock Park property once the family fully settled into Beverly Hills, closing out a chapter of his American real estate story that most fans barely noticed compared to the flashier purchase that replaced it. Selling it also meant one less property to maintain from overseas, a small piece of financial housekeeping buried inside a portfolio that, by this point in the story, was only about to get much bigger. The Forbes Park Empire. In 2011, the Pacquiaos bought a 3-level 1,500 square meter mansion inside Forbes Park in Makati City for 388 million pesos. And that alone made it one of the largest private residences inside one of Manila's most exclusive gated communities. Some accounts describe it as Manny's peace offering to Jinky after a rocky stretch in their marriage, a gesture measured out in square meters rather than words. The couple renovated the whole property extensively across 2018 and 2019. And while the work was underway, they rented a home nearby in Das Marinas village for roughly 1 million pesos a month, treating even their temporary housing like a luxury upgrade. The finished home carries 5 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a fully redone pool area, and a 4-car garage built to hold Manny's own collection of cars. By August 2020, real estate appraisal site Presello valued the mansion at 1.5 billion pesos. The number that followed still surprises people who only ever heard about the Beverly Hills mansion. A year later, that same valuation had climbed all the way to 2.3 billion pesos, a 53% jump in just 12 months, the kind of increase most stock portfolios never managed to pull off in a single year. A single Manila property had gained nearly 1 billion pesos in that stretch alone. Reports at one point even floated a 708 million peso asking price back in 2014, long before the valuation exploded even further. The Beverly Hills mansion made headlines all across America. The Forbes Park estate, meanwhile, quietly became worth more than 4 times what Beverly Hills originally cost, and not one single American magazine ever bothered covering it. Part of that gap comes down to who actually sees the house. Beverly Hills sits on a public-facing street where fans and photographers regularly gather outside the gate, while Forbes Park is one of the most private residential enclaves in the entire Philippines, patrolled by its own security force and largely closed off from casual sightseeing. The Forbes Park home doubles as more than a residence, too. It has served as a taping location for Manny's own television programs and as an extension of his Senate office during his years in government, so the property earns its keep in ways the Beverly Hills mansion, used mainly during training camps, never really has. Architect Anton Mendoza, the same designer behind other high-profile Manila addresses, handled the original build, and the finished result leaned heavily on a tropical, resort-style feel rather than the more traditional Mediterranean look found in the family's American home. Even the renovation years brought their own upgrades, with the family bringing in additional designers to refresh the interiors well past the original 2011 construction. By the time the work wrapped up, the home barely resembled photos from a decade earlier, right down to the landscaping surrounding the pool area. The General Santos Empire. Manila was never the whole story either, because back home in General Santos City, the family owns what locals simply call the White House, a mansion complete with a swimming pool and a covered basketball court. Widely considered the most expensive home Pacquiao has ever bought inside the Philippines, and a clear nod to the American landmark it borrows its nickname from. It was not even their first General Santos property. The family kept an earlier home in the Lagao neighborhood even after picking up the White House, unwilling to let go of the house that sheltered them long before any boxing money ever showed up. And on top of that, they hold additional residences in Laguna and Sarangani province. Manny's own 2016 Statement of Assets, Liabilities, and Net Worth listed more than 100 separate real estate properties, worth a combined 1.569 billion pesos, which works out to 46% of his entire declared net worth that year alone. That same filing also listed a General Santos City property worth 400 million pesos and a separate commercial lot worth 120.5 million pesos, on top of a Pasig City condominium bought for 13.9 million pesos back in 2008, a smaller unit that barely registers once it gets lined up against everything else on the list. Add Beverly Hills, Hancock Park, Forbes Park, the White House, and the Lagao property all together, and the mansions everyone recognizes from magazine covers still only make up a fraction of the full portfolio sitting behind the Pacquiao name. The family also owns a beachfront resort property in Glan, further out in Sarangani province, a spot mostly kept for private family use rather than any kind of business venture. Locals in General Santos still point out the White House to visitors as a kind of unofficial landmark, the same way people in other cities might point out a stadium or a museum, and the property has become something of a symbol for how far the family climbed from a neighborhood where nobody had that kind of money before them. Every property added to the list only reinforces the same pattern, since almost none of it sits idle. Family members rotate through the various homes depending on where Manny's boxing, political, or business schedule happens to take him that particular month. Even with all of it declared on the record through official filings, plenty of Filipinos only ever hear about a fraction of the list at any given time, since most coverage focuses on whichever single property happens to be making headlines that week rather than the full collection sitting quietly behind it. Put the entire list side by side, though, and a clearer picture starts to form. One where a single mansion abroad is really just the tip of a much larger, quieter fortune spread across 3 provinces and 2 countries, Jinky's own empire. While Manny's name sat on most of the real estate filings, Jinky was quietly building a public career entirely separate from her husband's boxing income. In 2013, she ran for and won the position of vice governor of Sarangani province, serving a full term through 2016 and stepping directly into provincial governance instead of staying a boxer's wife on the sidelines of local politics. That role put her name on budgets, ordinances, and public projects, all of it independent from anything her husband was doing inside a boxing ring. Alongside the political work, she kept investing in her own ventures too. And in 2021, she launched a skincare and makeup line called Jinkee Skin, followed 2 years later by a physical showroom back home in General Santos City where local resellers and distributors could stock up in person. She also runs a chain of boutiques called Jinky's Fashion World, stores that carry clothing and accessories she curates herself, business lines that exist under her own name rather than folded into Manny's holdings or run through his management team. She remains a fixture on Philippine social media too, regularly sharing her collection of designer handbags, jewelry, and international travel with millions of followers who watched her rise from that same mall cosmetics counter to a life most of them will only ever see through a screen. The woman who once worked a retail shift just to help her family stay afloat now signs her own name to provincial budgets, film credits, and business ventures a world away from where she started. And none of that rise was simply borrowed from her husband's career. Winning the vice governor's seat was not a given either. Manny had originally struggled to choose between 2 allies who both wanted his backing for the position, and rather than pick a side and risk the fallout, the family put Jinky forward instead, a decision that turned what started as a political headache into her own 3-year record in public office. She has since stepped back from elected politics entirely, choosing instead to pour her time into the businesses that carry her own name on the label. Her YouTube channel and Instagram account now double as a kind of ongoing advertisement for those same ventures, blending home tours, beauty tutorials, and family moments in a way that keeps her audience engaged well beyond anything tied directly to her husband's boxing career. Local reports have pegged the wider Pacquiao family business holdings at around 14 separate ventures across the Philippines, ranging from a sports bar and a gym to a merchandise store and a beach resort. And Jinky's own beauty and fashion labels sit right alongside them as some of the newer, faster-growing names on that list. Unlike Manny's boxing purses, which arrive in enormous lump sums tied to a handful of fight nights a year, Jinky's businesses generate smaller, steadier income month after month, a very different kind of financial rhythm from the one that first made the family wealthy. What the whole empire adds up to? Add every property together, and the total number gets hard to ignore. Manny's 2016 sale alone declared total assets of 3.4222 billion pesos against 350.595 million pesos in liabilities, which placed him as the Philippine Senate's second wealthiest member that year, behind only a handful of career politicians with far longer paper trails. By the mid-2020s, independent estimates placed Manny Pacquiao's overall net worth somewhere between $220 million and $515 million. Built from boxing purses, endorsement deals, and that same real estate portfolio scattered across 3 countries and dozens of individual titles. The Forbes Park mansion alone, once bought for 388 million pesos, is now independently valued above 2.3 billion pesos. A single property that has multiplied nearly 6 times over in value since the day they signed for it. And the Beverly Hills estate that opened this story, purchased for $12.5 million back in 2015, still sits inside a much bigger portfolio, one built by a couple who started with nothing between them. A General Santos boxer and the cosmetics sales lady who fought her own way into Beverly Hills, Forbes Park, and every mansion in between. None of it happened the way most people assume either, through one lucky payday or one famous fight purse. It happened property by property, year after year, while a former mall employee quietly built a name for herself that no longer depends on anyone else's boxing record. 25 years after two strangers met across a cosmetics counter in General Santos City, the empire behind them now stretches across 3 countries and more homes than most families could ever imagine setting foot inside, let alone owning outright. Every one of those properties traces back to the same starting point: a boxing career that almost did not happen, and a marriage that started with absolutely nothing in the bank to show for it. A cosmetics sales lady from General Santos City now owns a piece of Beverly Hills, a Forbes Park estate worth billions, and a General Santos White House her own husband built for her. Which property surprised you the most? The Beverly Hills mansion or the Manila estate now worth 6 times what they paid for it? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to her status for the next female fortune hiding in plain sight.